Uh, First, welcome everybody to our third coffee. It's coffee and chat. It's really lunch and chat with our friends at the National Park Service. I'm happy to be here with Wendy Cass. Um, and As this is just a casual affair, I'm going to just jump right in. Wendy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up here at Shenandoah?
Okay, sure. It's my 27th year here at Shenandoah. I'm just ending my 27th year, so it's been an amazingly long time. But I came here from New England. I grew up in Massachusetts, outside of Boston, and just enjoying being outside and working at nature camps and things like that. And then I went to Oberlin College and studied biology, and then after that, the University of Vermont to study botany. And I was pre-med actually before I went to college, or even in college. But then I met a 97-year-old emeritus botany professor who took us out on Sunday field walks every Sunday to different natural areas around, and just realized that botany was sort of the thing for me after that. And back when I applied to come to Shenandoah, the internet was sort of it wasn't as widely used as it is now. And I applied, on the internet to this Shenandoah National Park, sight unseen, like, woo, because the job just sounded like a perfect fit for my interests and skills. And I've just really enjoyed it. So I've stayed, and I can't believe I'm saying I've been here 27 years as the botanist as of August 31st this year. But that's what happens. Life's what happens when you're making other plans. You're just not paying attention. There you are.
Well, congratulations on 27 years.
So yeah, that's how I ended up here. Yeah, it's amazing.
It must be. So in the 27 years that you've been at Shenandoah, I mean, how do you pick? But what does a day in the life for Wendy look like at Shenandoah?
Well, early on, I spent more time in the field than I do now. I've gotten some, physical complexities that have made it a little more difficult to do the arduous type field work over the years. But now I always think about my time at Shenandoah as like every year I'm here, you grow a longer and longer trail, like a tail of projects and little initiatives and whatevers that you've started. And so I spend a lot more time now keeping everything going. Juggling, and keeping things moving in the direction I want them to move in. So I do a lot of coordinating of projects like the Big Meadows vegetation management, the rock outcrop protection project and management project is one of mine. And there's so much turnover in the Park Service that I find myself always training the incoming people on these legacy projects to make sure they keep moving. So I do things like that. I do a lot of administration. It's a good thing. I like working with numbers and organizing people and stuff because it's like gives me a strange joy. It doesn't for everybody, but I do enjoy that too. But like say this week is an interesting, it has a good diversity of things going on. I'm finishing up a damage assessment for law enforcement on where some illegal cutting of trees went on in the park. So I'm, evaluating that and putting a damage assessment together for them. I'm reviewing a report on bryophytes that we contracted with a cooperator to do. I went and visited a rare plant population to see how it was impacted by the recent flooding. I'm preparing to teach a workshop to state game wardens and law enforcement about ginseng protection, managing my crew, and then I'm also meeting with like Steve Paul, who's doing this project, and some other regional resource assessment projects that are ongoing. So that's this week. So it's a very diverse sort of job, and it's one of the things that really attracted me to the Park Service was that I wanted to do something practical, sort of chaotic and practical, and I got it, man. Like I like the diversity and the change. Every day is different. Every week is different.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, let's jump into the project management side, specifically the project that you're doing on the forest health monitoring. Can you, sort of talk about the project and what inspired you to apply for some funding and just jump in?
Okay, well, this project, I'll tell you where it came from. It's sort of been the greatest frustration of my career, that I haven't been able to complete the report that I want with the forest monitoring data. And I've made multiple tries having outside contractors work on it, and we just haven't gotten what I wanted back. And I realized that we weren't going to get that unless we did it in-house. But with all the other things I have going on, I've tried, but it's been a failure for me. I have not been able to make enough time or find enough time to get this project done. So we decided, okay, we're going to do it in-house. And then we were looking for funding sources, and we said, well, let's try the trust. They're very interested in, Shenandoah specifically and supporting our core work. We're always told, try to, work with the trust to support your core tasks. And this is the first time that's ever happened, that I've actually gone to the trust with a real core project of my program, not an extra project, something that is the foundation. So that's how it sort of evolved generally. Do you want me to tell you more about the project itself, though? Like what it is?
Please.
Do it?
Yeah. Yes. Jump into what the project is.
So the project is an assessment of forest health. It's basically using this monitoring data that we have been collecting for the last 22 years and using it to tell us how the forests are changing or not changing over time. So the variables that we're most interested in looking at right now are the trees, like whether the regeneration of forest trees matches the trees that are in the canopy of the forest. Because obviously you think about Shenandoah, without the forest, like try to wipe the forest off of Shenandoah, and what is left? Not like rocks and some really hot streams and soil. Forests are so essential. They're the matrix, within which all other things, mostly in this park, are happening. And so the purpose of this project is to increase our ability to manage the forests and protect the forests of the park. Because right now, we know that things aren't looking as stable as they have in the past. Like you drive down Skyline Drive and you see oak trees, dead oak trees, and you see the dead ash trees. We're losing these important canopy trees. But we don't really understand why it's happening in certain areas versus other areas. And we need to know this information so that we can figure out how to better go forward for park management. So this project, as I said, is about taking those 22 years of forest monitoring data, which we've been very carefully collecting and but not doing enough with, and then using that to basically do advanced ecological modeling. And it gets really kind of hard to appreciate unless you're a statistician. But basically you're taking the data and then you're looking at the status of the forest, you're looking at trends, so how that status changes over time, and then you're doing modeling, which looks at different variables, and you try to figure out what variables are having the most impact on the changes that you're seeing. And then the step that comes after the project is, once you've identified what those variables are, you try to see if there are things that you can do in forest management and restoration that can counteract some of those variables if they're having a negative impact on the park forests. So
that's a lot. So let's take a step back real quick. Let's talk about, I was lucky enough to go out with you and Stephen to one of your sites, but can you talk a little bit more about the number of sites and sort of, obviously being physically there, I got to see it, but maybe it's kind of cool. You're taking young people out there, and what are they doing? What do you do when you're at a site? How many sites? And a little bit of that.
Okay. Well, there's 160 of them. And they're 24 by 24 meters in size. And there's a forest plot, which in this case is a big square in the woods. And these plots, the program that it's part of, the Forest Long-Term Ecological Monitoring Program, or LTEMS for short, began back in the 80s, way back in the 80s when before the park had an inventory and monitoring program, and a series of 60 plots were put in place to look at the effects of the spongy moth, which at the time was called gypsy moth, to look at those impacts on the forest. They were put in by Virginia Tech. And then the park took over that program and expanded it in the 90s into this inventory and monitoring program. So we go out to these 24 by 24 meter plots in the woods, and then we sample all of the trees in the plot for how big it is in diameter and the crown health, and what species it is and whether it has evidence of insects and diseases. And then we measure all the shrubs in these belt transects to figure out how many shrubs of different size classes there are. And then you crawl around on your hands and knees in a smaller belt, and you count all the little seedlings to see what species are coming up in the seedling layer. And then we also look for invasive plants and herbs in the whole plot. The crew leader usually does that. So it takes, I don't know, it depends on the plot, but we do about one a day. The crew can do sometimes two a day if they're really moving. But these plots are stratified on the landscape of the park based on elevation, aspect, and geology, or bedrock geology. So there are these land unit types. And then there's a certain number of plots in each land unit type, depending on the amount of the park area that is covered by that land unit type. So stratified random.
That's great. So you sort of mentioned some of the things that you're looking at, like, width of the trunk and, tree canopy and critters. And are these all signs of sort of like, it's like, what in my mind is like, what does a healthy forest look like? Particularly here when we're specifically talking about the ecosystem and the ecology of Shenandoah.
Yeah, I mean, and that is, forest health and what is a healthy forest. There's not a super short definition, but basically it means that the forest possesses the ability to sustain itself, to continue to sustain itself, and in its unique composition. So you have an oak forest, and it is sustaining itself as an oak forest. And what that looks like in the forest is that you typically have, native trees. You would have native trees. You would have layers in the forest, layers of life. Think about it. You don't just have trees and then just like nothing underneath them. You have large trees, and then you have saplings, and some shrubs, and then maybe underneath you have some little seedlings coming up. So you have those layers going on, and then you have diversity. Most of the time in a healthy forest, you're going to have diversity of species, and that gives you stability and resiliency, because if something happens to one, others can fill the space, and it makes it able to be stable. That's
wonderful. Well, you've been with Park for 27 years, and while I know you can't, the study's still ongoing, but I feel like maybe there's been good observation going on in the last 27 years. Are there positive and negative, but obviously things that you've maybe observed or have seen in your time at the park, and what the implications of those trends might be that you're seeing? It's hard. I realize it's not data driven per se, but
it's not
27 years.
Not data-driven. And that's sort of the why we are where we are with this project. And we see more negative than positive right now. That's and I don't want to be like depressing, but we see a lot of tree defoliation, leaves being eaten up or dying off, and we see mortality too. And the causes of that are varied, but we see it from insects like the emerald ash borer and the spongy moth, the hemlock woolly adelgid. But we also see diseases like this sudden oak death, which is more like fungus, seems to be taking a real toll on our oak trees. And then we see drought impacts. These last couple of years have been very hard on the forest. And then you combine that with spongy moth, and you have the layering of stressors on each other, so they compound each other. So we do see that, and in the last, what I've seen in the last, I would say 10 years, it's been a lot more noticeable, especially like the mortality along Skyline Drive. And then we see the spreading weediness of the invasive plants. When I first came to Shenandoah, we didn't like Oriental lady's thumb. We just didn't see it. And then now it's just like everywhere in the park. And we can see that a higher and higher proportion of our forest monitoring plots are being reached by the lady's thumb and by the garlic mustard. And we're seeing in particular these large patches of Asiatic bittersweet that are just kind of swallowing up the forest. And so those are some negative things we're seeing. And then in those areas where we see, especially the spreading weediness, we see this very poor regeneration. We don't see tree seedlings coming up, or we don't see them living to get big enough to grow into a tree. Especially with the Asiatic bittersweet. That stuff is pretty impressive. Okay, so I see a lot of negative things. Yeah, that is frustrating. And I know my crew leader, Steve Paul, he's been on my crew for 8 years sampling the forest plots, and he says, oh, it's just devastating what we're seeing at some of these plots from the bittersweet and the invasives, just from when he started, the difference over the 8 years since he started, because he's been to some plots multiple times. But then on the positive side, we did see that active management, like the spraying of the BT to control the spongy moths this spring, did help in the areas that we were able to afford to spray, but there were some pretty ruthless cuts going on, like exactly little slivers that we were going to keep in the spray paths because it just wasn't practical to spray the whole place. So that was inspiring to see that. And then this may seem like talking out of both sides of my mouth, but we do still have the pockets of stability in the park. When you get far enough away, typically far enough away from roads and trails, there are still some really, really beautiful, pristine areas in Shenandoah. So it's not a lost cause. It's frustrating, but it's not a lost cause yet. And so there are these huge stressors, the defoliations and the droughts, but we are seeing that certain areas of the park are more resilient than others. And I think understanding why certain areas is very important to us right now.
Well, that's good news. And so do you think that the results of this project will allow you to sort of understand, why these certain pockets are doing better and maybe being able to replicate some of is that the hope? Or
that is the hope. I mean, you never know until you get there.
Get to the end. I know.
But we're hoping that it will give us a better sense of which areas I think we know it will give us a better sense of which areas, which types of forest are the most unstable and vulnerable to this degradation, so that we know where to focus on, like the replanting efforts or the invasive bittersweet control efforts. Because right now, it's just very difficult to prioritize.
Yeah.
Yes. So that is the next step beyond this. But we are working with Jake Hughes, who manages, the invasive plants and restoration program. In the development of this report, we are talking with him and what would be most useful to you, and trying to make sure that we are linked up.
That's wonderful. So I know we're all very excited for the results and sort of the plans that sort of come after it. And I have one more question for you, actually two more, and then I'm going to open it up to other folks on the screen if they have any questions. What can people do when we're in Shenandoah or even in our own backyard to sort of help keep the forest healthy? Do you have any tips, tricks, best practices when we're out there?
The biggest thing is to clean your boots. Clean your boots and any equipment that you're bringing into the park to make sure you're not spreading invasive plants into that wonderful little pristine place you went hiking. Keep those invasives out. And if you are lucky enough to have property that is on the boundary of the park, anything that you can do to treat invasives on your property, to keep them from spreading up into the park, that is very valuable to us. Not just with the known invasives, but just in case, the next newest worst thing shows up. We don't want them sneaking in from the edges or coming in on people's boots. So that's the message we try to just try to promote.
Oh, thank you. All right. And one other question. Are there any books or resources you think that might be good resources for learning about forests? Any
Um,
favorites?
no favorites. These days, you just Google forests.
Google's
But
ruining everything. I'm just
what
kidding.
are
It
my
makes it so easy.
favorites? This one, it's a favorite because it's like the pieces are falling out. It's an old Audubon just guide to eastern forests.
Oh,
I like this one because it's not just about plants. There's some about the moths and the mushrooms and snakes and like whatever birds. It's just a nice overview of those of eastern forests. There are other books what's his name? I wrote down. Doug Ptolemy. He writes a book about the nature of oaks. That's an
yeah.
interesting one. And then what's that other one? Managing oak forests in the eastern U.S. Those are ones that are interesting. That's by Kaiser and Führer and Harper. But that's getting more into nerdy stuff.
Well, thank you for sharing those resources. All right, I'm going to open it up. Does anybody on the call have any questions? You can either drop it in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead, Christine.
This is a real hand, not the other little
hand. No, that's fine. I love the
little
real hand.
So. Yeah, you've raised a lot of questions to me, but when I came before I was listening to you was the CDR has a list of plants that are rare or extirpated or extinct in Virginia. And I was looking at the extirpated plants, which there's about 83 of them. And these are plants that have not been seen in Virginia in generations. And I wondered if by any chance you knew of any of them up in the park. It's not that they're necessarily extinct, but it's just they haven't been seen for 50 years.
Been checked. Yes. Well, I have to see the list to be sure, but we were just contacted by the state, the DCR staff, about their aging records for rare species, which they turn historic and become unverified if it's more than 20 years, I think, since it's been visited. So we're in the process now of trying to combine our records with their records to update some of those. And then also to put a project together to basically have people out and do some re-inventorying of the point last seen for those species. Is that what you're getting at? I mean, because when I first got here, I saw a historic record for Minanthes trifoliata, which is the buck bean. I don't know if you've ever painted that one. It's a beauty. No. It's in the Big Meadows swamp. And I was wandering around the swamp one day and just blundered into it, and it hadn't been seen in 30 years. But I think they had written the records wrong. They'd gotten north and east mixed up on the directions to it, and it was right there all along. So there could be others.
Interesting, because I've been working on a project of trying to paint some of these ones that are extirpated and using photographs and botanical specimens, that are dried. And I wonder, if they really are extirpated, and that's why I thought I'd ask you.
Yeah, and I would say maybe. I would say there's a pretty good chance that they aren't all extirpated. It's just a lack of effort being applied.
Well, that's
to
what
look
I
for
wondered. I mean, there was one that I think hadn't been seen since John Smith sailed into the Chesapeake Bay or something like that.
Well, that might be extirpated.
But others I wondered. So maybe I can send you a list of the ones that I've looking at that I've been working on. So okay, great, thank you. The other thing I'd like to, have you read Light Eaters?
Light Eaters? No, I haven't. Let me write it down.
While that's happening, we did get a question from Hal and Alex in the chat.
Communicated.
Oh, you froze up, Christine, on my end.
You're frozen.
Sorry.
You're moving now, though.
Okay, the book I really recommend to everybody is called Light Eaters. And it's this wonderful survey of the new science of plants. It's kind of an adventure story, and the author writes very well, and it's kind of opened my mind a lot.
I'm going to check it out.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like we have a a question from Alex and how much does doing trail work, i.e. weeding and contribute to the spread of invasives? Do you have a sense?
It contributes. I think yes, we know that it contributes. Yes, it contributes a lot to the spread of invasives along trails. And in some cases, the invasives do seem to move away from the trails. I mean, that's how when you're bushwhacking through the park and you're off trail, you know you're getting close to the trail because you start to see the invasives start to pop up underfoot, and you're like, I'm getting close. So we do work with the PATC, or we have worked with them in the past, the PATC and the Park Trails crew, about trying to promote techniques to limit the spread of invasives along park trails, but more work could be done on that in terms of education and like making sure people know that if they have a stretch of trail that they work on and part of it's heavily infested and part of it's not, that they should work from the clean end towards the dirty end so that they're not dragging invasives on their tools. Yeah. I mean, you find some people are more receptive than others to those types of comments.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got 2 minutes. Any more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
How about
Okay.
but I don't want to hog the time. But how about wavy grass and Japanese stilt grass and some of these things that we have around here? I of course, garlic mustard I've just given up on. Japanese stilt grass I've given up on, but and I don't think I've seen the lady's thumbs that you mentioned.
Oh, you have.
I just don't know it. That's all.
You just don't know it. You've seen them. What about them? It's clearly the whole herbaceous invasive plant issue is massive and more than we can manage park wide with the current resources. But what Jake and his team do is prioritize to the highest value areas. So areas near rare plants, the more unusual forest types, and they try to put their efforts there. And that's sort of the best we've been able to do at this point, because eradication is no longer an option for many of those species.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
autumn olive and the tree of heaven and all of those things. I haven't seen much tree of heaven in the park. Has that gotten up there?
Oh yes, there's plenty of it, but they've done a lot of work to kill it, particularly on the roadsides.
Yeah.
So there's less.
We've been killing it all along our border with the park. So.
Bravo. Okay.
Well.
Great.
Then
Right.
it shoots up again. So. It's like Medusa.
Herbicide. I hate to say it, but you have to herbicide.
Oh yeah.
Herbicide,
that's the only way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I am sorry to cut this conversation short, but we promised Wendy only 30 minutes. So thank you. Any last words, Wendy?
No, I would just encourage everybody to get out there and walk off the trail, even just a few yards, and look up and enjoy the forest. It's a whole different sort of feeling when you step off the trail and you're surrounded by it. Yes, just increases forest appreciation. But thank you all for attending. Appreciate your time.
Thank
you, Wendy, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.